All right, our next panel is end-to-end visibility. And this is essentially the coming revolution in supply chain and manufacturing visibility. And so the rationale for this is you'd say, and I mentioned it this morning, that we've seen this platform transformation happen in a lot of different industries, but not so much in logistics, not so much in manufacturing. And John was kind enough to sort of point out to me that you're talking about on the order of a quarter of the global economy just in manufacturing, and then add in logistics, and you're starting to be close to a third. And so I thought, who better than to ask some entrepreneurs and some CEOs who are running companies that are operating in this space to explain what's happening. And so what I'd like, John, and since you're a little further away, and then Ina, if you could just tell us a little bit about yourself, but more importantly, the company and the fundamental problem that you're trying to solve, and then the same thing for Ina.
My name is John Sobel. I'm delighted to be here with you today. Thank you, Jeff. I started my technology career in the mid-90s, and listening to the comments this morning about B2C platforms and how you're starting to focus on B2B, my career followed that trajectory. A bunch of us, 4 or 5 of us, got together more than 10 years ago now. We were all web heads. We had worked with big data and kind of big consumer internet platforms. And we thought there was an opportunity in industry. Industry is incredibly, there are very strong connections. It's got all kinds of potential network effects. So we focus on taking the data that is generated in factories, and there is a very large amount of data generated in factories. It's not usable. It's not good data. It doesn't support AI. It's hard to understand it. We built a technology over a decade to pull that data out and then in real time convert it into usable information. Most factories in the world are maybe half or 2/3 as efficient as they could be. They do a really good job with the tools that they have. And our focus is on helping them use the data to be better at manufacturing.
Thank you, John. Ina.
My name is Kuznetsova. I'm the CEO of a company called ToolsGroup. We're trying to make the supply chain the force for good, which means to have as many product or as much goods on the shelf at any given time or even given moment as needed. So we use artificial intelligence to forecast demand, and we also do retail planning, which is a bit different from manufacturing, replenishment, which is replacing goods or materials or products as they get moved, assortment planning, which is figuring out what is the combination of, let's say, models and colors and sizes that you need to have on your shelves for retail, and the same for distribution. And we service about 400 customers, a lot of them very large companies like Best Buy and JCPenney and Absolut Vodka and Maserati and Ferrari and Aston Martin and Luxottica, Gucci, Bulgari, a lot of great names which I can talk about for a very long time. I'm excited about our customers' business. And like John, I started my career in the 90s, and I started actually in technology. I started in IBM and eventually became the first global vice president of IBM of Russian origin. And then I was recruited into a supply chain company, into logistics. And for several years, I turned around back to growth, a $9 billion logistics company, and spent every month, a few days in operations learning logistics. And the biggest learning was what a stone age the industry was in terms of using IT. And I have stories and stories about me coming to the CEO and asking, what software do we use for this? And he would like, what do we use for this? Well, we have an Excel table and we have a phone and we call the regions and we scream at them if they do it right. So my next 3 jobs was bringing technology to supply chain. That's what I do for life.
That tracks so completely, especially this Excel workflow. I think it will still be there long after I'm
It will,
off this
oh,
stage.
absolutely. We'll retire long before it
Unbelievable.
does. Yeah.
Yeah. So we had a chance to catch up and have some conversations, and we've talked about the use of artificial intelligence, and of course, and we'll circle back to the generative, but of course the bulk of the use is in kind of predictive analytics and the use of AI in that. And you've done a lot of work in that, both from the science side and throughout your career. Where do you see that going? And especially now that you can have sort of more fine-grained items, and you mentioned that ends up being hard to do demand pooling. So then all of a sudden your nice normal distributions and things that have easily characterized expected values and analytics and predictions get a lot harder. How do you what have you done to help move the ball forward on those rare events?
So just to shake up things after lunch, how many software people are there in the room? Just raise your hand. Great. And how many mathematicians? Too bad. One. How many supply chain? A few. So here's the good news. It takes the combination of all three to make it work. And to really make the forecasting efficient, first of all, you have to have a good math. And the latest trend is to use the probabilistic models. And I wouldn't write formulas and bother other non-mathematicians with it. But in a simple way, it's, first of all, to recognize that you have to factor risks as they appear. Right? It's very simply, I can explain. You leave the house in the morning. Do you take your umbrella with you or not? 50-50. But then you look out and it's kind of cloudy. You factor in the risk. You say, you know what? Probably 45-55, right? And then you listen to the radio forecasts, those who still have radio, maybe in your car, and they say it will really be pouring in the afternoon. And now you really take that umbrella with you. So you factor your risks as you go. Now, if you have 500 million SKUs and locations, as some of our customers do, and over half of our customers have over 5 million of SKUs and locations, there is no single human being or even Excel spreadsheet that can do it. Right? You have to have artificial intelligence doing it for you, for each of those items, figuring out what the risk is. A supplier for some of those items is systematically late. It's a risk. There is a military conflict near the border. It's a risk. And you capture this information every day and you factor it in, right? So this is the mathematics. The other mathematics that is really, really important here is exactly what you mentioned, Joe, which is the distribution. When you look at any warehouse, whether it's manufacturing or retail, or a shop, or a distributor sending items out, we differentiate between so-called A items, those that you constantly ship every day, right? In terms of your neighborhood grocery store, they ship a lot of milk every day, right? Every second person buys milk. It's an A item. And then there are items which are probably sold a few times a month. I want to say baking yeast, but I remember that during COVID it was an A item and the deficit. But you can probably figure out some rare spice. And then there is some item in the back of the store, maybe a particular very expensive sauce in a jar that you probably sell 5 times a year. Now, in terms of the manufacturing or distribution, it will be a certain electronic component, or what the manufacturers called the golden screw. Right? When you cannot ship a whole car because you miss one small detail, right? They call it the golden screw. You have to have enough of those screws, right? You have to have enough of those. Those are B and C items. So when you look at those items, their distribution, how often they leave the warehouse, are different. For the A items, it's a normal distribution. And I want to say anyone can forecast that, not anyone, but anyone with a good degree and relatively decent software and a standard library of machine learning can forecast it. When you look at B and C, it's very easy to make an error. And you will say, well, what's the big deal, right? I will over-forecast. I sell 2 and I will forecast 4. Well, now it will take you 2 quarters to move it out. You made a mistake, you forecasted 8. Now it's stuck in your warehouse for a year. And now you have 10 million of those items. That's your working capital sitting there. And now you have an interest rate going up. And now you're paying a big interest on the money that is sitting in your warehouse, occupying space, and you cannot move it out. So you need to design a different distribution for those items, right? So this is the mathematical part. Then there is the supply chain part. You may have a great AI, you may have a great machine learning, you may have all those models. Those models have to be trained on specific business cases for specific industry and sub-industry, right? People think of manufacturing as one big conglomerate. Well, there is discrete manufacturing and process manufacturing. There are outer parts and there are chemicals, right? And then we start looking down, down, down. And even the models for cheeses and salami may look different from the models for dairy. We have customers for both, that's how I know. So it's not difficult to do on the math side. You just need to have people who understand supply chain enough to configure that software, train that software, factor it in, right? So this is where supply chain comes in. On a more deep level, you have to set the right KPIs. Dairy has 10 days shelf life. You have to factor it in. Outer parts, they don't go so for quite a while, right? So that's not a problem. There will be other problems there. So understanding supply chain is the next very big issue. And of course, the third part is software. There's a big trend in large companies to write everything specifically to how their processes are operating. And this is great. You don't have to retrain employees. You got exactly what that vice president said you need. The only problem is that if your priorities change, I mean, there are other problems. You have to maintain it, you have to update the versions, but let's say you have a lot of money to do it. But if your priorities change, COVID happens, UPS strike happens, something else happens, right? You have to rewrite the whole software. And if you could just reconfigure it, check and uncheck the boxes as you do on your Mac, right? Just go in, check the preferences, change it, maybe do a little bit longer process. It's a good software. You can go on. But if you have to rewrite the whole thing, by the time you finish rewriting, you have to start rewriting again. So a lot of it really comes down to having very efficient, configurable, fast to implement, and fast to redeploy software. Those are the overall trends. Now I can get off my software horse and just quote some of the leading industry analysts like Gartner. And they talk a lot about the need for probabilistic models and forecasting and a delayed decision. We can talk about it later when we talk about the trends. And things like how you structure your software, how you make your modular, how you make it fast to implement. But all those things are important, and they may not be as interesting and sexy as getting enough of clicks on the platform, but that's what drives 90% of the economy.
That's tremendous background, and honestly, some of which I've thought about, but not all. So now let's take it up a little higher and just talk about some of the mega trends.
Sure.
So we talked a little bit about, sort of what your organizations do and sort of some of the fundamental problems you're solving, but of course that's in a broader global context. What's driving change, for example, in manufacturing today? Resiliency, we mentioned, ESG, circular supply chain, and of course, always grinding cost pressure.
Yeah.
What are you reacting to?
So you guys had an interesting short discussion this morning on productivity statistics. With manufacturing, there's not a lot of doubt about this because we can count how much stuff we make. Manufacturing productivity has been essentially flat for 15 or 20 years, and I need to thank Peter. He wrote a paper in 2012, which was an inspiration to all of us at our company. He pointed the bat at left field, and he said, manufacturing is going to need to go digital to deal with flat productivity. In the United States, there's a huge shortage of people to fill manufacturing jobs right now. So on every dimension, the manufacturing sector is pressured. Energy is more expensive. We don't want to use energy for obvious sustainability reasons. The pandemic was a real wake-up call because for 20 or 30 years, I was thinking about it today at lunch, when I got out of college, there was a famous paper called The End of History. And it said, it was a brilliant paper, and the argument was, now that the American kind of political system and economy have emerged from the Cold War, there's a paradigm for the world, and it's going to be the same for the next couple hundred years. And we kind of all thought that in the industry, and everybody optimized for the status quo. Pandemic came along, and these words really matter. We went from a focus on efficiency to a focus on resiliency in about a week. So the sector is under constant cost pressure. On a geopolitical level, countries are realizing now that they need to have strong manufacturing bases. So there's all kinds of factors that if you're running a plant or you're running a manufacturing firm, you need to have much better insight and control over how you work than you have. You're just not going to survive if you do it the way you did. Okay, so about 10 years ago, everybody started to talk about Industry 4.0. Germany was a leader in framing that concept. And there's been this very strong appetite and a lot of money spent on digitizing production and on AI. It has gone very slowly. That's shown in the productivity numbers. We can talk in a minute about why this is so hard. But the appetite is there. Almost every manufacturer with more than 1 or 2 plants has got people dedicated to this, and everybody's trying to figure out how to do it now. So we're in a really interesting part of the cycle. This isn't like, there's no Netscape moment for those in the room who were doing this in the mid-90s. There's not a kind of a light bulb that flashes on in one instant, but the last decade's been a giant windup, and it really does feel like it's starting to turn on.
You know,
So there are a few big trends, and in fact, we talked a little bit during lunch, and we started with the same thing, right? One of the big trends is the companies trying to establish a more holistic view of their supply chain. In the past, they will optimize manufacturing, and then they will optimize assortments and supply chain, right? So we will work in 2 different rooms and never meet each other. Today, the companies realize that they actually need a much more holistic view of their whole supply chain to be able to change it very quickly, to be able to redesign. So there is a big trend towards looking from production planning to supply chain planning to the execution, to the retail, to the order management, at the big picture, and navigating that smoothly, right? Meaning it has to be underlined by the same data unification layer or digital twin. It means that you have to have the flexibility in your processes, in your software, in your people skills to make these changes. And I think that trend is just starting. It will continue and increase, and we will see more and more of that. Another very big trend, of course, all of us experience is regionalization, right? I wouldn't say that there is a deglobalization of economy. We still have, and will continue to have, a lot of companies working global, and supply chains are global. But there is a very different attitude towards risks, towards breaking down the possibilities and creating duplications. In some cases, it means onshoring, bringing the production back home. In some cases, nearshoring, bringing it from China to Mexico. In other cases, diversification. So we'll see a lot of this redesigning of the network, right? And I think that will drive a lot of processes overall. And the third trend that I will mention is also related to the better ability to preempt the change and react to change and answer the change. And this is what Gartner analysts called delayed decisions. And I really think this is a very deep, concept when you think about it. In the traditional planning economy, we make the decision today about everything, right? How many dresses, in what colors, with what buttons should I order to be in that store on that date? And it all worked before COVID. And then the lead time, which is the term for how long it takes between the moment you order something and you get it into your warehouse, started getting longer and longer. And it reached 80 weeks for fashion items. So for all the women in the house, or men who are conscious of what they're wearing, try to predict what you need to order today to still be fashionable 86 weeks from now. Color, length, right? Buttons. So people started thinking about delayed decisions. What do I have to decide on now and what I can decide later? Can I place an order today with just the minimum so that the provider knows there's so many people and sewing machines and factories I need, but maybe we can change colors later. Maybe we can choose buttons and accessories just a little bit later. So this is a delayed decision. In supply chain overall, there are lots of other areas where you have to create delayed decisions. For example, how much you ship from the warehouse to the store. The traditional model is you more or less break it proportionally to the revenue, then whatever is not sold is sent back to warehouse and then sent back. And we spend a lot of CO2 going back and forth, right? If you can delay the decision, if you can see how your store sales is going in real time and send smaller batches, smaller portions, or plan better, use artificial intelligence and send different items to different stores, you save on those emissions, right? So that delayed decision becomes a big trend, and it goes across supply chain, across software, across a lot of processes in economy.
Let me probe a little bit. So, and I love the delayed decision because you can then commit to some things early and then maintain some flexibility. But you mentioned sort of everything changed in a week. Both of you said some variation of that. And then the need to be able to redesign the network. What have you seen in terms of variability in firms and their ability to do that? There must be a spread there, and we'll forget the ones who are slow, but what are the characteristics of those firms that were able to make a really quick pivot in the network topography?
I'll share some perspective. We work with manufacturers in maybe 20, 25 verticals. It was really interesting going through the first year or two of the pandemic and just learning from people. There is I think I would frame it like this. So manufacturing is such an inherently interconnected enterprise. There's 5,000 automotive plants in the North American automotive supply chain, but they don't in any way, shape, or form really work as a network. They should, but they don't. And they all want to. So there was a lot of technology stuff that happened fast. Some firms were quite quick to adapt. They would do things like bring phones in and start using video, and a lot of remote management happened really fast. There was also a cultural component, which is a function of how an industry works. Some industries are very closed, some are more into sharing. And really the most dominant kind of variable in our experience has been the mindset of company leadership. We're always asked, is this the right vertical for data? Is this right vertical for AI? And they're all kind of right for it. The biggest factor that we observed in how companies responded was the mindset of the company's leaders. And that's something that, is a human thing. It's an organizational and a human thing. And when you look at all the research about leaders and laggards, and McKinsey and the World Economic Forum do some great work on this, the distinguishing factor is always, are people open to change? Are they trying to do this stuff? So I could say a lot about data and kind of readiness and technical stuff and all that, but I think that's a second-tier factor. I think it's people.
Wow.
I could not agree more. In most of the cases, the change is not because the technology is not available for it. It's because people are not ready for it. From medical records to supply chain planning based on AI, it's people's ability to trust software. It's people's ability to use software rather than Excel sheet and screaming at the regions on the phone, if you like, that creates an issue. If there is a pain, actually software appears pretty quickly, thanks to the startups and venture capitalists, right? But that's, I think, is one very big factor. But there is another factor. I've seen smaller things that changed recently. So for example, in our software, right, we have regular releases with new functions, every software company does. One of the functions we have been very rapidly increasing over the last year is the ability to select alternative transportation model. Because first you had the West Coast strike. Those of you who follow the news don't have to be in supply chain. That's the best thing, right? I can now show at cocktail reception and say I work in supply chain, and people don't go in next to the next person. They start lining up and screaming at me why the baby formula is not on the shelves. So everyone knows about the supply chain. Everyone knows about the West port strike. Probably everybody knows about UPS strike. What do you do if you have UPS strike? Well, yeah, you shift to FedEx or USPS or your local provider. And that's great if you're an individual, you just drive to a different office. But if you are shipping out millions of product items, you have to have the contract in place, rates agreed, And your software has to provide the ability to rapidly decide. And also, in some cases, there are limitations, right? FedEx can only take so many extra packages. So you have to be able to assign certain priorities to the packages that can be delayed and still go with UPS, but cannot be delayed and will go with FedEx and probably at a higher rate. So adding, and this is maybe a very simple example. There are more complex examples with the ability to transfer orders from one plant to another. If the plant started on an order and suddenly something happens, can you transfer half an order and finish it in another plant, right? So building that capability into the fabric of the business is what is required for that design. And it starts and finishes with people's mind. Technology will always catch up.
And can I just pile on one thing Ina said? I'm not commenting on her product or really anyone's specifically. The tech is there to do this. That said, buyers of software in industry have been lied to and misled and oversold for many years, and we don't make it easy. I mean, think about somebody working in a hot plant that's on a clock. They got to get stuff done. They don't have time to type things into a keyboard. So the making the kind of activation energy for this lower, that's really hard. That's a mixed technology problem, and I stand by what I said. The biggest challenges in all this are now people, but the technology community, most of us here today probably have spent a lot of time with virtual world technologies, with nice, clean, structured data from the internet or large websites. When you try to apply this stuff in a working industrial environment with messy data and people who have other things on their mind besides looking at a screen, that's a big leap. And so it's a responsibility of the industry to make that better. I think that's been hard for people too.
Which really goes back to kind of a blunt question I asked you, John.
Fire away.
It's taken so long.
Yeah, why is this so hard?
Why is this so hard? And that goes back to why are we seeing such a slow take-up of these network effect business models that we've seen in other sectors?
So Jeff asked me that question last week. I've been thinking about it for 4 days. I want to try to give a crisp answer, and it's hard to give a crisp answer. First off, the entire industry, the data industry and industrial data, completely missed the fact for a decade that physical world data is not like virtual world data. And what I mean by that is there's been some very well-publicized efforts in healthcare. I read this great piece in the New York Times a couple years ago about all the struggles that IBM had with Watson. Amazing technology, but when you took it out to healthcare records and the way data exists in the physical world of hospitals, really hard to apply it. So one thing that took a long, long time was to get the technology right to handle messy physical world data, make it nice, clean, ready for AI, but also understanding in the industry that that was necessary. I think a second factor is that, early in my career, I grew up in virtual world platforms where you could literally launch a Threads and everybody would come to it, and it was kind of new. You weren't really displacing or supplanting existing workflows. When we apply this stuff to industry, people have been working the same way for decades. I was thinking the other day, I'm trying to get off of using the Mac platform and using Microsoft. And it's taken me months just to make that change. We want to go into these giant factories and say, okay, all the stuff you've been doing, come on over to this platform, it's going to be great. So I think those two things have made it tough. That said, there is no more concrete, significant opportunity for the use of data than there is with things like energy consumption and productivity in the industry. When you pencil out the math on this stuff, it's mind-blowing. The people who write about this at Morgan Stanley have talked about 5% global growth in GDP if we get the data problem right. So the pull is there. The inertia is very high. If we can knock down kind of these barriers, tech and adoption, having people believe that it's better and easier, that's what it takes. And that's hard work. That's not tech work, to Ina's point. That's going out and hanging out with people and figuring out, how do you work? How do we make this easier? What would make your job better today. Is this a win for you? And then it's a win for your plant manager, and it's a win for the company. So you got to go to every level of the house and just figure out what's going to be better for people.
And just to piggyback, I fully agree. It's not because people who make decisions are stupid or uneducated, right? There is a long, long latency between some innovation appears out there and between it can be adopted in this hot, messy, dirty environment.
Yeah.
My biggest moment was when I came to a shipping tech conference, but not as an IBMer, but suddenly as a chief commercial officer of a logistics company. And I saw my former colleagues from IBM and my former competitors from HP going on stage one by one and basically telling different variations of the following story. If you give me $500,000, I will put great tech experts in your warehouse, and they will figure out everything, how to make things run smoothly and load faster, and everything will work. And I'm sitting there surrounded by my colleagues in shipping, and they all go, if I had $500,000, I'll just buy more trucks.
Exactly.
Right? Industries have different ways of solving problems. Carriers, ocean carriers made a bundle during COVID, right? What used to cost about $2,000 to $4,000 to ship a container from Asia to Hamburg or Asia to San Francisco became up to $40,000 during COVID, right? Ocean carriers made a bundle. Do you think they all went and innovate everything? No, they just bought more ships. So the price fell down, right? And those cycles go up and down. Now, they didn't just do that. They actually invested in some technology, and they invested in vertical integrated solutions. But largely, they resorted to what the industry has always been doing. So it takes time. And another very fun example from the shipping life. So I used to run a platform, a marketplace, if you like, for the shipping, right? Where carriers and ocean carriers and forwarders exchanged paperwork to load a container on the ship, right? And it may sound very sexy that we processed 26% of all global trade, but in reality, we processed the paperwork between carriers and freight forwarders to put a box on the ship. The company is successfully sold, so I can get away from my pitch to the venture capital, say, we processed paperwork. Right? So there was one, and the level of adoption of doing this electronically as opposed to doing it by phone or by fax or whatever varied country by country. And there was one country where the electronic adoption was through the roof. 95% of all containers was shipped on our platform. Not because we were so good, we were just the largest platform, right? It was done electronically. And the country was Brazil. And we worked with 65 carriers. In every carrier, I knew someone who went to Brazil as the head of the country and came back with a record electronic adoption and immediately got a promotion within the company. You know why that happened? So those who are as old as I am, remember the term BRIC countries? The technology came to Brazil as very early, and shipping, international shipping, came to Brazil later. So the younger generation learned how to use computer by the time they went into international business of shipping. So for them, it was a normal thing. Yes, of course, there is an app for it. That's a simple answer, right? When you look at manufacturing, when you look at distribution, when you look at who works in the warehouses, in most of the cases, those are not the people who grew up with there is an app for it, right? So, time will show and some innovation will accelerate naturally because this generation is growing.
I love that answer. and it's kind of a variation on the technological leapfrogging, where when you have an installed base, you're sort of stuck with the old, but if you're starting greenfield, you get to move forward.
For real.
I've spoken with a lot of B2B firms in the last several years, a lot of platform company managers, and John, you and I were on this World Economic Forum working group, and a lot of around metrics.
Yeah.
And there's quite a bit of interest at senior management level in ESG tracking.
Yeah.
What was frustrating when I started to get further and further down into the factory floor, that interest seemed to get lower and lower and lower. How do you account for that? Where's the disconnect in what is happening at the sustainability commitments here and what's going on the floor or the loading dock here?
I got a couple comments to share. And it was really interesting looking at metrics with you. I never paid much attention to metrics earlier in my career, and then I got into manufacturing, and it's very intriguing stuff, actually. So the first observation is, believe it or not, when you get to the actual tactical level of how stuff is made, people have no idea how much energy they're using or where they're using it. So we can't expect people to use less when they don't know how much they're using to begin with. They literally know, this is my power bill for the month, it spiked. I think it was because of X, Y, Z, but there's very little association to, in line with a lot of comments we just heard from the prior panel. If you give people the data and they can see what's going on, then it's a lot easier for people to care and take action. The other thing is incentive structures in companies. If you look at how plant managers and plants are often motivated, it's literally make this many widgets, do what you got to do. There's a lot of heroism and scrappiness and talent in manufacturing plants to hit numbers. And only when the top line aspirations of management are translated into how people are compensated and rewarded and motivated are you going to see people pay attention to it. It took me a long time to figure that out because, as human beings, we all want to fix these problems. How you are kind of judged day to day is a big part of this.
So I think when you operate with something small, you really don't see the big difference on whether you load one box or two boxes, right? When you have 500 warehouses where those two boxes, then that becomes a big number. And it may be visible on the top of the company, but not be necessarily visible down there. So basically saying what you just said, right, Jeff? It's the visibility and understanding. My personal observation is that even on the top level of the company, there is a much higher interest to ESG when it can be also translated into savings. So coming back to making supply chain the force for good, getting enough product on all the shelves does not mean that your warehouse and stockrooms should be full to the brim. It means also not making a supply chain the CO2 provider, right? So that means you have to manufacture less, ship less. You just have to manufacture and ship right products and ship them to the right destination at the right time. We did a very interesting project with one of the cruising lines. And it's not even manufacturing, right? But we used exactly the same software as we use for manufacturing. The cruise lines ship food to the ship, right? And once the ship left the shore to go to the next cruise stop, you cannot load it. So you have to be there in time, and you have to bring enough. And nobody can say, oh, you forgot the cups. Let's go back and bring the cups, right? The ship leaves, right? So they actually measure how much they send of everything, right? So they wanted to make the cruise line more sustainable. That was the senior management desire. That's great. What does it mean, right? We thought, well, maybe we can eliminate the waste of food on the ship, right? There is always 4% rotting, natural attrition, but everything else has to be eliminated. Well, it's a ship. Everything shipped in there eventually will get eaten. But it will sit in the fridge for 2 months until someone orders that lobster. So you have to ship the right things. We learned interesting facts. We learned that if there are more Europeans on the cruise ship, you have to have more chicken legs. And if there are more Americans, you have to have more chicken breasts. But what it takes is analyzing the ticketing data. It's actually not that difficult. You just have to make that correlation, and you have to plan for it. But when we talked to the management, right, of course, they look at CO2 emissions. When you talk to the next level, people say simple things. If we can ship less items, several boxes less, we can maybe send one less truck. And each ship goes to 10 points on the loop and then goes back, and that one truck then translates into 100 less trucks of people, right? So that's the optimization of shipping the right thing at the right amount of time. People on the ground in the warehouse, they just have to load the truck and get it there. Now, if there's one box less, it's better chances, right? So they appreciate it. But in the end, it has to really be connected to the very economical KPIs of shipping less, manufacturing less.
And if I can, I'm watching the clock. There was a lot of good conversation this morning about AI. Industry is just such a great domain for the application of AI. It could be how many boxes of cups should we ship? So I'll give you an example. The glass industry for 100 years has had a yield of 85% when they make glass. They just take glass that's not right, they throw it back in the furnace. If you can go from 85 to 90% yield, which is doable, you just reduce energy content per unit by 5%. Industry, I think manufacturing accounts for something like 25 to 30% of global greenhouse gases. So there's a lot of innovation going on in basic energy technologies. But the data is in all of these places today to make 5, 10, 15% improvements in sustainability that happen to be very profitable. I mean, the alignment of incentives is beautiful. This is a platform waiting to happen. Once we sort out some of these technology and people challenges, it'll be no problem, right? But it is a huge opportunity for data and AI. And everybody's been winding up to do this for a long time.
So I have more questions, but I do want to give folks a chance, because I know that we're coming right in here for a landing. We'll wait about 10 seconds. No, not even. Yes. Can you use the microphone, please? We have some people online.
So if you think about the technological change that you've seen in the supply chain over the duration of your careers, has it gotten to where you would think that it would be at this point? And if not, why not?
I'll give you a view. It's not where I would have expected. So coming from internet land, I, like most people I know in that community, assumed a level of data interoperability. So Ina, speaks very cogently about there should be one end-to-end view of everything, from demand, production, sourcing, logistics. It should all be one world, right? Because it is. But even within the same company, there is so little commonality at the lower levels of a data and technology stack that it's the Tower of Babel. And that shocked me. Now, my company responded by saying, let's work on that problem. But I think a lot of people in our industry have not fully grappled with that kind of foundational issue. When that gets sorted out, all the tools that we all work on all the time can be thrown at this in a minute. So I think it's way behind what anybody expected. What do you think?
Yeah, it's probably even ahead of what I expected, but my expectation was low.
Good for you.
When I came to logistics, and that was about roughly 11 years ago, right? Remember, I came after 20 years of, I sell a server, it will materialize where it's supposed to materialize. I worked for IT industry, right? We didn't really bother much with the shipping. And I realized how behind the industry is. I just get really happy when I see adoption and I see the change. And I always found that the expectations for people in the industry were unrealistic. I remember being an event and someone asked, well, you drive so much of your revenue from shipping out the parts. Don't you think that in 3 years, the 3D printers will completely replace the auto parts shipping? That was 2012. And I told them absolutely not. And they thought, have some faith, right? I do have some faith. I think in the next 15 years, we'll still be shipping out the parts because the business case for producing them locally and shipping all the material and the printer will still not be there, but some balance will change, right? So I think there is a natural process. The industry is extremely fragmented. It's much more fragmented than we can imagine when we work in academia or in consulting or in marketing, right? It's very, very fragmented. Fragmented doesn't just mean thousands of companies working in unison, right? It's like orchestra. They also have very different levels of their ability to adopt technology. They are based in different countries. They have, I told you 95% in Brazil was doing things digitally, 5% missed it because there was no proper internet in some coastal towns. And that now is better here, right? So things do change, but that fragmentation is natural because the world is global and beautiful and very different. So it will continue. So there will be enough of work for us to do.
I can't think of a better place to land on exactly that. I can't improve on that. So I'm going to say thank you so much, John. Ina?
Thank you.
Although I will say there is a call to work in manufacturing and logistics, and that needs smart people. All right. So we have a break now. There should be some coffee and refreshments, and then we will come to our last session.